we are going to be looking at how to convert something like a vector file here into a fully realized 3D object by using Blender, and then we're going to print ours out using Chitubox. In our case, what we're making is a little tiny maker's mark, the sort of mark that potters will use to imprint their mark into soft clay. And so in our case, I've created this file here. It's just pretty simple. It's a chevron. The file itself is transparent, so we have a shape that has been cut out. And when we actually make this three-dimensional, what's going to happen is the area that is transparent is going to be hollow in our extruded shape, whereas the area that is black is going to be solid. So when we press this into clay, it will actually imprint the areas that are black and leave hollow the areas that are white. So in our case, we have this file. It's called just chevron is the title of the file that I've made. I've got this good to go. I'm actually going to save this out as an SVG. So rather than an Illustrator file, I'm going to save it as an SVG. You can title it appropriately. I've already saved it, so I'm just going to replace it, save it straight to the desktop. So once we have our file, and you don't want it to be too complicated if you're creating a maker's mark, you want it to be relatively simple. We will come here into Blender. And when you open Blender, if you pick a new file that is just general, it's going to start with this cube, and the cube is perfectly centered on all three axes. And we'll use this as sort of our format. So at first, I'm going to come to my Z axis here. I'm going to hit G, and I'm just going to drag the cube off to the side just a little bit. Then I'm going to import my file. So I'll go to File, Import, and we'll pick the format that we have, a scalable vector graphics, SVG, right here. And we'll navigate to the desktop where we have saved that. And we see that we have imported this. Now, the reality is it's a very, very, very small file. So I will hit S to scale. I will scale this up probably significantly as my cube is larger. I'll hit G and I will center this up really nice and easy. So what we have now is we have a two-dimensional object. It only has 2 dimensions at this point. And then we have our three-dimensional cube. And we'll want to put these things together so that the maker's mark isn't just floating in space, but that it's actually attached to a larger piece for when we print it. Then I'm going to come to Object, and I'm going to select my SVG, and I'm actually going to convert it to a mesh. Right now, it's just curve points, but I'm going to convert it to a mesh. And what this will let me do is when I'm in edit mode, if I select all of this, I will be able to hit E and extrude the shape into another dimension. And let me just undo and redo that fairly quickly. But what I've done here is I've gone back, I've taken and I've hit Object, Convert, Mesh, and you'll see up here, this is a curve. This is our shape here. So it has the curve dimensions, and I'm going to convert that into a mesh. So convert, not curve, but mesh, and that will become a mesh file. And then if I come in from object mode to edit mode, I think you can also hit tab for this. You will see I have a whole bunch of points. So this is no longer a vector file. It is now a set of connected points or a mesh. So I'm going to hit A to select all of my points because we don't want to just select some of them. I'll hit A, and then I will hit E. And what E will do is it will allow me to extrude this, and it will give me some depth. Now, you want depth relative to the sort of mark that you want to make. So I'm just going to bring it about here. Whatever you want to make with that is fine, but we will have this then extruded mesh. So now we can go back into object mode, and you can see we have this dimensional mesh that has been extruded, which is really great for us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this cube, we're going to put this cube right on top. And so we can come into Z. Again, I can grab the G and we can center this up. We can come down to our Y axis and then lift this up just so that this is centered somewhat on here. And we just want to make sure that these two things are intersecting one another. So you don't want a gap in between. You want to make sure that they are intersected. So I can do this again on my y-axis and just bring that down nice and easy. I'll bring it down a little further. And I'm also going to check on my different axes to make sure they're good. All right, cool. So now what we have is somewhat reticent of a maker's mark. Unfortunately, these two objects, while they intersect, once you go to 3D print these, are not going to work together. They are discrete. If we look at the mesh here, they are discrete things. They are not connected up in any sort of way, shape, or form. So we need to connect those up. Oops. And we need to make sure that those are going to work together in the same way. The other thing is I may want to actually just come in and edit the corner vertices here. Select this, and I'm going to hit G, and I'm just going to bring this edge in just a little bit here. Cool. Whoops, wrong button there. I'm just going to center it up. This will just make this whole file a little bit more in line with the shape that I want. So try this one more time. Balance that out nicely. Good. So now what I will do is I'll come back into my object mode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this cube, and then I'm going to come down and I'm going to actually add a Boolean function. If I can find it here. Here it is, modifier. So I'm going to add a Boolean because what I want is I want Blender to actually combine these files into a single mesh. So I'll add modifier, Boolean, and then for my object, I'm going to select this eyedropper, and I'm going to select, and I've labeled it here, chevron, and I'm going to union them together. And you can see when I do that, that the materials actually, the surface of the material change, and I have some artifacting here, and we'll figure that out in a second, but eyeball it, make sure it looks how you want your mark to be, and then you can come here and actually apply that change. Now, if we take a look at this and lift it up, you see I still have my original chevron shape, but I've added that shape to my cube here. So I can actually go through, hit X, delete the original shape, and now I have this object, which is really nice and straightforward and simple. I'm going to rotate this whole cube, hopefully a perfect 180 degrees. Not quite, but I can take this cube and I can rotate it, but now I have a 3D file that's going to print much nicer. If you leave that extra bit in there, you're going to have multiplied geometry, and your printer is going to have a really hard time parsing that out unless you are pretty savvy with that. So here we have our file. We're going to now export it as an SVG, which if you're just trying to learn how to create a 3D object out of vector, thanks for hanging out. But we are wanting to 3D print this. So I'm going to save this out now as not an SVG, sorry, an STL. So I'll save it to the desktop, and I will save it as chevron.stl. Export that. And now we have this 3D mesh file that we can very easily bring into our slicer. So if you're working in Cura, you can do that. If in our case, we're resin printing, so I'm working with Chitubox, I can come in and I can just drag and drop, or I can import the file directly in. In my case, I'm just going to drag it right off the desktop, drop it right in, and you can see that that has been imported. Now, it is significantly smaller than I'm going to want it. So we can select our file here, we can scale it, and I can say, all right, I want my height or my z-axis to be 10 millimeters or a full centimeter, which is a pretty good size for a little maker's mark like this. I can also then rotate it 180 degrees, and this will put it on its back, which is much more conducive to printing. So you can see we've adhered that whole layer, and as it prints up layer by layer, which is something like this. So it'll start here, it'll print up, and I will have no overhangs or empty spaces, and it should print up fairly nicely as the whole thing rises. From here, we can actually slice the file out. So we'll pick what we're printing on. In our makerspace on campus, we have these two printers. Say we're doing it for the Mars 3, I'll pick that. I will add anything that I need to, make sure it's adhered and green. I'll hit slice, and then I'll save this file out. You can say it'll take about 30 minutes to print, and we'll use a whopping 2.1 cents in resin. And we've done it. We've made a maker's mark. From here, I can just hot glue this onto a dowel or adhere it onto a dowel, and I've got myself a really nice mark. Now, You may decide that you want to extrude that mark more. You may decide you want to file down the edges. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but this is the file that we need to be able to bring to our 3D printer, and we've just taken a vector file like this and converted it into a maker's mark. Hope this helped.